Okay, are you going to announce it for us? Thank you. Okay, welcome to an episode of It's Not What You Think. This is Rick.
And this is Darren.
And today we're going to study the communion as part of the Mass. Now, from what I understand, the communion isn't necessarily a standard piece of music within the Mass.
No.
It's something that they kind of put together while we're performing the act of the communion.
Yeah, and interestingly, the only reason they started to use a hymn over the communion was because of the events of the Lord's Supper, which says, "And having sung a hymn, they went forth to the Mount of Olives."
Oh, okay. So of course you gotta do what the Bible says.
Correct. So I guess the idea is that they were singing a hymn while Jesus was doing his thing at the Lord's Supper.
Right. All right. We have an example of a Gregorian chant that is considered a communion or something that they would be singing during communion.
Okay.
Salite Domino, qui ascendit super celos celorum ad orientem.
That was quite pleasing.
It was. I noticed that there are a good bit of melismas and some drawn out melismas.
Mm-hmm.
I might add. It's not very typical of Gregorian chanting, but it is evidently pretty typical of communion.
Yeah. I liked it. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I mean nothing fancy,
No.
nothing too crazy.
Right. Good example of what a communion could be. Now, let's fast forward close to 1,000 years. We're in the 1400s now.
Right.
Guillaume Michaud, he's a French composer, and I'm sure he's rolling in his grave because I didn't pronounce his name right. But the most influential 14th century composer.
Wow.
Like Geoffrey Chaucer, the famed poet
Right.
of Chaucer's Tales.
The Canterbury
Tales.
Yeah.
He was inspired by this guy.
No
and
kidding.
really idolized this guy.
Wow.
And so,
So
this
guy's
guy...
a titan.
Yes, exactly. And he's written a lot of music, a lot of compositions, and he wrote one, Misa Notre Dame, and in it there's a official communion, and so let's give that a listen.
Okay.
No.
was interesting. I think separate from the other one, we had a choir.
Yeah, and it was very beautiful.
Yeah.
I found not like beautiful as in ornamental or no pyrotechnics and no even female voices. It was all men within a lower register, but it had I think that lower register really brings a soothing quality, a comforting quality.
And you can tell, I'm assuming they recorded it in Notre Dame, I could be wrong, but you could tell that lower register was resonating really well. It sounded real big.
Yeah, agreed.
As we noted, that first note goes right into it, and it sounds huge.
Yeah.
It seems like a soloist.
And it wouldn't surprise me if they got some harmonic notes out of that when they just went that like you hear some of the Tibetan monks will sing like that, and they'll just open up this huge resonance with all these crackling overtones and harmonics and stuff.
I mean, that makes some bit of sense. It's interesting that you noted that there's no fireworks, there's nothing spectacular about it. It's all because I think I think the reference here even specifies that the music was not meant to overshadow the act of receiving communion. And so a lot of the melismas, despite being drawn out, were tempered. It was very tempered. In fact, this says, though many communions contain melismas, the floridity is restrained rather than exuberant.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. It's almost, well, it's not almost like, this is a real poor example, but when I go to a restaurant and I want to talk to someone and the music is so loud that I can't hear them, and I gotta shout, and I'm really uncomfortable situation. So these guys obviously said, let's not have that happen.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? It's not the like you said, the communion is not itself a musical piece. It is a holy sacrament of receiving the host, and so I think the idea is, well, we should sing over it because that's what may have occurred at the Lord's Supper.
Right.
But let's keep holy the act of receiving the communion rather than call the attention to the music, which typically is a psalm or some type of hymn.
Okay. Great.
So, interestingly about the communion, each of the different cultures throughout the Christian church's history had different ways of singing over top of the communion while it was taking place. So the Byzantines and the Celtics used hymns and psalms. Ambrosian had two antiphons without psalms that were sung. The Roman ritual had an antiphon and a psalm. And so you can see that they're trying to find different ways to sing some type of hymn and psalm over type of the rite of receiving communion.
Right.
And I don't know that they ever actually landed on what comes out to be a sort of standard model. The reference here, it does mention that in the Roman Mass that there is an ordines, whatever that is, the Ordinus Romanus, I think is like a ordinary Mass liturgical styles. And it tries to set about. The only thing I think they can get right is that following the communion, the rite of the receiving of communion, once all the communicants had received it, they go into the Gloria Patri. It's almost like that's the only standard thing. But it's interesting that they have these different styles, and I wonder if there are any still persisting that might be more Ambrosian, that have some of these more dramatic melismas versus something that we listened to earlier, the Guillaume version.
I'm thinking back to the times that I was growing up and attending Catholic Mass, and I remember there wasn't any singing, there was just someone playing the organ. And it was this very solemn piece that wasn't in your face, if that is a term. It was just this quiet, and she was probably playing a hymn,
right?
Except without the words, So it was just this contemplative piece on the organ. So speaking of contemplative pieces on the organ, that's not what we're going to hear. We're going to hear something completely different.
Okay.
and when I mean completely different, I mean we're going to the 20th century now.
Okay. That's going to be different.
This guy, his name is Olivier Michaud. Again,
Another Frenchman.
another French composer, organist, and ornithologist. Do you remember what an ornithologist is?
Well, given my recent knowledge of Dune lore, ornithopters are.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so I'm imagining something to do with birds.
Birds, yeah. He studied birds. One of the major composers of the 20th century. He was also an outstanding teacher of composition and musical analysis. His students range from Xenakis, Pierre Boulez, Stockhausen. I mean, these are huge 20th century composer names that aren't necessarily household names.
Sure.
But once you start dipping your toes into the world of 20th century modern music, these guys are like the giants. So I'm giving you fair warning.
I appreciate the warning.
All right.
I still don't know what to expect, but
Yeah, I honestly don't either. I think I've listened to just one of his pieces of his entire catalog in my entire life. This will be the second.
well, let's see what he's
All
got in
right.
store.
I started off saying we're going to listen to something different than organ music, and lo and behold, it's an organ piece.
Yeah, you didn't give me enough warning.
It is an odd one.
I wasn't ready.
Did I mention modern 20th century composers are usually odd sounding?
That was quite odd.
Yeah, it's an odd, but it has some interesting elements to it.
Yeah.
Like, one interesting element was I was introduced to something called a musical archetype. We think of archetypes, at least in psychology, as visual imagery coming from myths, or conceptual archetypes like motherhood.
Right.
But Leonard Bernstein brought up the idea of a musical archetype, and he mentioned that the minor third tends to be, throughout the entire world, a universal interval on children teasing each other. Na, 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 na. And that's a minor third going back and forth. And we heard that in the piece.
We did.
And it came out real crystal clear, since it's not a whole ensemble. It was just, one organ. Yeah. And it just hit me full throttle. I'm like, wow, that's like kids teasing each other.
And the other thing I noticed, and I'm not a astute enough listener to know if this is true, but early it sounds like he hit some triads that were really dissonant.
Yeah, correct. I heard those too.
And that seems to me to be very intentional, because it's that sort of dissonance is not really allowed in liturgical music.
You're right. And I remember listening to Michael Tilson Thomas, and he was playing a piano piece, and then he would stop right in the middle. He did these very crunchy chords, and he stopped, and he said, these chords are to grab your attention, because very often we kind of float away and we leave the moment. And he said, but here, right in the center of this piece, it's bringing you back and go, okay, I'm here listening to a piece of music, stop daydreaming.
Yeah.
And it could have been something like that.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, now that you're saying that I'd love to hear the rest of what this Mass sounds like, because if maybe the composer here, I'm not going to try to butcher his French name. What he's doing.
Olivier, how's that?
Yeah, Olivier. Maybe what he's doing is, in keeping with the style of how a communion's supposed to go, the music isn't really supposed to be the centerpiece. And so maybe he's just saying, I'll play whatever the hell I want in the background of this communion, because it's not the important part. So I'm wondering if the rest of his Mass is like that, and or if it's not, and this is the one that is like that because it's not, the music isn't important. You know what I mean? As opposed to all the rest of the parts of the Mass, the music is really driving the Mass itself, that portion of the Mass itself. Versus the communion, where it's the act of receiving communion versus the music.
So your hypothesis is the rest of the Mass may really be vibrant.
Maybe more vibrant, maybe more conventional in many ways.
Yeah,
and
that would be pretty
interesting. And he broke convention for the communion because it's not an important part of the Mass, the music.
Well, that's your homework. Go find Oliver and listen to the rest of his Mass. But before we move away, I want your response to the very end when he had the ultra high note and the ultra bass note at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't get any more obvious. He was deliberately doing that.
Well, and I mean, I think I like to read into music.
Sure.
My theory is that he's drawing the distinction between the earthly and the holy, and that's kind of what you're doing when you're receiving communion. You, a lowly person, are receiving the host of the Lord in receiving communion, and so you've got this high and low.
All right.
And so you combine the two in the act of receiving communion. That's my theory, anyway. But it was it was unpleasant. But he may have had an ulterior motive behind why he did that.
Very true. Very true. Okay, that's all we have for today. I hope you enjoyed the show.
Stay tuned.